the question of vulnerability is key to this year's ITFA and to the work of many artists across all platforms, including my dear friend whom I'm going to invite to the stage in a second. But right after I say a few words about Sophia Almaria, I met Sophia a few years ago. I tend to like this way of counting years, a few. And she was this energetic, sparkle in the eyes, wannabe filmmaker with a big project, already with a published novel, personal novel, that she wanted to turn into a film. And then waited for the film, and instead of the film, had a whole web of fragments of stories spread around the world, spread around platforms, and ended up with an artist who is as good as in winning awards as much as in rejecting them too. So Sophia, kindly join me. What do you feel?
Sorry.
Sugar?
Get you a little sugar. A little sugar. Thank you, Arwa.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to be here.
I'm happy you're with us too. And
I don't know about the sparkle, though. You're the one with the sparkle in the eye.
you still have it.
Thanks. I'm losing it fast.
But I will start by asking you about this very big question for many of us here. We just heard May and Amy mention ex-makers, ex-documentary makers. I can say I'm also an ex-maker now. I took the job of working in ITFA.
Ex-machina, ex-makers.
Okay, so how about you? You wanted to make a traditional film in the beginning. You wanted to make a film that starts in the beginning, ends in the end, and goes all the climax and then resolution. But it was a very personal thing, and now it's, what, fragmented, spread all over our life? Why? Why didn't it work? Why wasn't it interesting enough?
I think it wasn't that it wasn't interesting. It was the institution of financing film that was the sort of eternal problem I'm sure a lot of people in this room can relate to. The film that we met over was very different from the one that I got very close to making, which was a film called Beretta, which was a revenge film. And I think that it's quite traumatic to get very, very close to making a film. Beretta was a feature film. I had written the script, we had cast, we had even shot some of the B-roll that we were going to use. We were doing it in a very sort of like exploitation film style. So we went to Cairo, we shot all of the sort of like big crowd scenes in situ, and then like it was like for AIDS, so like we were going to then match the actual fictional, sort of the actual climax of the film to the stuff that we shot. But then the whole thing fell apart around a sort of clever idea that someone had wanting to bill it as the Arab Miss 45. And so we had contacted Abel Ferrara to ask permission, and Abel was like, just let the chick make the film, man. And and even though Abel gave us his blessing, there was a lot of lawyers who were concerned with that. Now the I think essential part of this, and the thing that maybe relates it to some of the larger questions people are asking about, like for example, how does one grow creatively, or how does, for example, an AI might learn that kind of a process, is that I think very much of it like it was a tree that was like growing and then it got slashed and burned. But what happened was that fungus and like moss and all kinds of little sort of little ecosystem grew around it, which ended up being an art practice, various exhibitions. All the pieces of the film that were never made ended up being much more effective as an exhibition, which included the research around the film and all of the scripts laid out inside of a vitrine with a tarot reading that finally gave me the clue that I should stop. And the footage turned into various pieces of work. And so even though the central sort of, I guess, traditional thing in the center wasn't there, all of the sort of garnish existed, and it was a way for people to engage with the narrative in a way I think that was unusual. And I think narrative is a word that I'd like to talk more about with you.
That's exactly where, where your work is extremely interesting. What have you done to the narrative?
What is it doing to me?
You just
What is it doing to us? Who's controlling the narrative? Is this a consensual reality? I'm not sure. But how many of you here know the carrier bag theory of fiction? Ursula Le Guin?
Wonderful, nobody.
Yay! Can I tell you about it?
Please do.
Okay, I think this is relevant to a lot of the projects that we've already heard about, and also generally. So Ursula K. Le Guin, the science fiction writer, R.I.P., basically used a paleoanthropological term called the theory called the carrier bag theory, and then grafted it onto narrative. So the carrier bag theory is that in human history, we traditionally think about the spear or the weapon as the first tool that we developed. But in fact, this theory posits that the carrier bag, a sort of woven thing in which to put seeds and berries and nuts and whatever else one might pick up, pretty rocks, as the actual original tool, and that to think that the spear was the first tool is a very masculine, very quite staunch and perhaps incorrect way to think about the way that we developed as hunter-gatherers and wanderers. So if you put that onto narrative, you think about, okay, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have, we've all read Save the Cat or whatever, like you have like your pieces, Kubrick thought in fives. You can think about film and about novels and about all kinds of things as a straight line. But if you instead take the carrier bag as a sort of like way to think through it, what happens if you take little disparate anecdotes, little stories, little facts, a piece of a poem, somebody else's lyric, throw it all into the bag, and then lay it all out for people to put together themselves and to map themselves? Well, that's a much more interesting way to think about narrative or storytelling, and it's really liberating. And I think that that's the exciting thing about a project like the one that you see here, which was lots of different things, some fictional, some documentary, and then put into an exhibition space which you drew your conclusions from yourself. No one was telling you this is what the story is. So that's the sort of gist of how I feel about that particular word.
So I'm going to ask for the video to be playing as a background to our talk about the future. We're just looping two video art pieces of Sophia's behind us while we ask her about them. You basically come from a very unique background, I would say. You're American Qatari. You've been in both worlds. It's part of who you are, both these worlds. And then you did this big project on examining the Gulf, not as a socio-political or geopolitical reality, but rather as a platform for futurism. Can you tell us a bit about this? Because there were many different ways of looking at the Gulf region as a dystopia. And when I look at your work on the subject, I don't see the high rises, I don't see the big Ferraris and Lamborghinis. I see something totally different. How did you think about it? How do you see future from this angle?
It's not going to be very optimistic, I'm afraid. But I think about what happens beyond dystopia in a sort of post-human situation. Because the Gulf, as many of you may know, is going to be uninhabitable in our lifetime very soon. And I feel tremendous grief about this particular thing because, as is the case with all climate change-related disasters, which are happening every day, all the time, all over the world, there are particular unlucky geolocations which feel the effects much sooner than perhaps other places. And So that was part of the beginning of this idea about thinking about the Gulf as a sort of as a premonition of what is coming for everyone. I hope you're afraid. Be very afraid. I mean, we are talking about Frankenstein here, a little bit of horror.
It's totally fine to be afraid, I think. I want to return to your use of the word liberating. I think one of the most prominent issues looking at film and art is the question of freedom, censorship, self-censorship, limitations imposed by different paradigms. Do you feel you found freedom with the new approach, with your new bag, your new way of approaching this?
My new Louis Vuitton carrier bag theory. Well, I think freedom is a great and massive even concept to grapple with. The dream of total freedom is also deeply, it's a sort of esoteric dream that I think is something that we all long for, but it's not possible with any kind of comfort. And I think as long as I'm uncomfortable, I can continue to make work. And when I start to get comfortable, my immediate instinct is to run in the other direction. But that takes a lot of energy. I don't know about whether I've reached that. It's a very difficult question, Aurora. I don't think it's maybe possible. Yeah, I'm dubious. I'm figuring it out. I'm slightly distracted by this Mad Max
video.
reference.
Who made this video? Yeah.
It's like a hideous Frankenstein made out of found footage and random things I shot on an airplane. So.
But again, you enjoy technology very much. To me, it was, as I told you this morning, I was always waiting for an opportunity to be next to you when you make your Instagram story every day.
Well,
it's always been like, how does she do that? You use it like a second language.
I don't know about that. I mean, I use it like a sketchbook more. Okay. That's what I think about it as. I need to have some kind of excuse because I'm very dubious about technology and even my own interaction, my narcissistic interaction with social media, of course, is like something that slightly disgusts myself. Like I'm disgusted with myself in the way that I use it, but it is weirdly relaxing, and it's like a diary, I suppose. So it's very simplistic in terms of the way that I use that, but I do enjoy the fact that you enjoy it.
It's another question is something that is becoming very urgent debate in our entire world, in our film community, and in art and culture in general, is the question of pluralism, the question of inclusive platforms. And you come from two worlds that have very different privileges and very different, what's the opposite of...
Both very privileged in their own ways.
Yeah, but also they have a different... they're not only privileged, so to speak. How do you deal with this? Do you feel just privileged? Do you feel also you have pressure because of that?
Well, as you know, I think it's... I mean, if you're speaking on a base sort of like personal level, I don't, for example, in the Gulf, I don't feel privileged. My family are not privileged people. They're Bedouin. They're sort of very clearly separate from the sort of world I think that people imagine when they think about the Gulf. But and it's only because of that I am able to do what I do, because there's nothing to lose. There's no status. There's no reputation. There's nothing that I have to uphold, and so in that way I'm very free in terms of privilege. But regarding the word pluralism, I think anybody here who comes from various backgrounds or has to straddle like very different worlds especially growing up, the more complexity and pluralism that you can contain within yourself and within your own experience and not lose your mind, the more I guess I don't want to use these weird binaries like better and worse, but the bigger one will be. It's really important to continue growing. So that's why I think being able to contain multitudes is my ultimate goal. And that might mean identity-wise, that might mean work-wise, that might mean, being able to carry as many different pieces of narrative as possible in one bodily carrier bag until my end of days, basically. Sorry to be really like emo and goth. I'm just in that mood today.
You're trying to convince us it's just today.
It's just today. I'm usually really bouncy.
I'm going to ask you to tell us a bit about the project that is part of DocLab's exhibition this time, the cookie. Can you tell us about the story of how this project came about?
Absolutely. So Mirror Cookie is a project with the Chinese-American actress Bai Ling. I'd been fascinated with Bai since probably the late 90s or early 2000s. She had a blog, which I was quite obsessed with, which was very open. There was sort of no boundaries. She was sort of, I think, a pioneer in the way that she was sort of beginning to control her own narrative. And again, like the sort of massive institution of tabloid media is really, really aggressive and really violent towards the sort of bodies and minds and sort of images that it consumes and then presents to us. And so I was interested in trying to find someone who I could work with in unpicking that and sort of give them screens outside of, say, the TMZ or the, like the sort of tabloid media all over the world in China or in the States or elsewhere. So I got in touch with Bai, and she was excited about basically being the sort of central figure of this. So there are fictional elements of it. There was a full install. We did, the one thing that you won't see here was something called Major Motions, which was a fictional ident for a sort of Columbia Pictures logo kind of a thing, but instead of a torch, she's holding a Hitachi magic wand vibrator. And it is sort of this torch of self-love. And the video that you see here, Mirror Cookie, is it's based on a self-help technique of mirror work, where you look into the mirror and you tell yourself positive affirmations all the time. But what we used, because I didn't want to write words and put them in her mouth, was we used the cut-up technique and then used stuff that she had written on her own social media and then mangled it together and then had her recite her own sort of like self-help kind of like language back to herself. And what was interesting was when she started telling herself these things to the camera as a mirror, it was really emotional. So you can see in the video, she really gets, over the course of a day, it became, I think, quite intense for her to be telling herself, like, you are loved, and, these sorts of things, which was what I wanted, was also like to have love and sort of like appreciation and sensitivity be at the center of this suite of works. And then there's another portion of it called Not Really in Reality, Reality TV, which is kind of a riff on the reality TV format of interviewing. So you can see all of the crew, all of us behind her in a makeup suite inside of a studio, and I'm asking her questions, and then she's giving these sort of like weird, quite beautiful, sometimes very profound, sometimes nonsensical, but always engaging answers to very, very basic questions. So yeah, it was sort of unpicking all of that. And then the last part of it is called White Man's Bible, parentheses, Revenge Porn. And that is a stack of Playboy magazines, and on the very top is Bai Ling's Playboy cover. And it was when Star Wars Revenge of the Sith came out. And that cover ended up getting Bai cut from Star Wars, because Star Wars, the franchise, Lucasfilm, didn't agree with the fact that she had gone and done this unofficially, and it's a family show, like film and everything. So she tells the story, and there's a little star field in her stomach, and she like she tells me the whole story about the decision to pose nude, how difficult that was for her or not, like going through all of the decision-making process and then telling the whole story of the aftermath and what happened afterwards, but all of it encased inside of this stack of Playboy magazines on which she is the top. So in terms of documentary, it was a way in which to sort of, present the story of one person's experience with the camera in many different, it's very multivalent, it's from many different directions. So I guess I hope that, I've just literally told you the whole thing instead of just you go and see it. Sorry.
No, I'm sure we can still see something different. You're always speaking about anarchy, Sophia.
Am I?
Yes.
I'm suspicious of that, but okay.
Yeah.
I'm suspicious of myself, so that's fine.
Do you think it's needed?
Yes. I think a strong dose of it is painful and terrifying, but in order to facilitate any kind of change, if you look at natural systems and things, I think sometimes things like disaster are, they breed new forms. What? Why are you looking at me like that? Just theoretically, yeah. We'll see if I can put my money where my mouth is, or yeah, I do. I think maybe that's the only way forward.
Okay.
Relationship anarchy. Have you heard of that phrase?
No. I like it.
Google it, y'all.
Promising.
Yeah.
Okay, will do. Sophia, thank you very much. And
thank you,
everyone. See you next.